Hello, Brett. How are you this fine Monday?
I am doing wonderful. I had an amazing weekend. The grandparents took the kids, and Jennifer and I were tourists in our own town, and we ate out like 17 times in 2 days and went swimming and did all kinds of fun stuff.
That is fantastic. What's the cool new restaurant in Fort Worth, Texas these days?
I'm gonna say it wrong, but it's Don Artemio, which is an interior Mexican restaurant, and it was outstanding. I ate there Friday with Dan and Celeste and Jennifer, and it was really, really, really incredible.
Wow, I can't wait to go.
And ironically, it was opened in the old Mr. Gaddy's.
Nice.
Yeah, it's a little bit nicer than Mr. Gaddy's.
I bet it is.
I have to admit. I heard you played some baseball.
I did play some baseball. My vintage 1860s baseball league had a big tournament this weekend, and I played in 6 baseball games over 2 days, which is about 4 more baseball games than I'm really comfortable playing just from a stamina standpoint. But
how many innings?
7 innings.
Holy cow. I mean, that's like all day baseball. That's like you're playing baseball for like 10 hours a day.
Yeah. So, we started at like, 9:30, 10 o'clock in the morning and played till almost 5. So,
wow.
It was.
How'd y'all do?
My team is terrible. We were outscored in 4 games by the 41-6. What made it worse is 4 of those 6 runs came in 1 game. So it was. We played some teams that were pretty good. And what's really interesting is like like the first game we played, there was an 11-year-old on the team, and he went 3 for 4. He was a good hitter. He had like this little like mini bat, but he was good and fast. Wow. So yeah.
And y'all only use wood bats, right?
Yep, wood bats, no gloves, a different kind of baseball. We wear goofy, ye olde uniforms, and so it was fun.
That's fun.
It was a good time.
Well, let's talk about the future of work.
Future of work.
Yeah, because obviously, Jamie Dimon's in the press. Elon Musk is in the press. Elon Musk tells SpaceX and Tesla workers, and this was the part that, I mean, if you put this all together, is really interesting.
Yeah,
you must be in the office for at least 40 hours. And then later, like a day later or a couple of days later, goes on to Twitter and says, I really admire the Chinese, work ethic of burning the 3 a.m. oil. So he's basically saying, I want you in the office for at least 40 hours, but it would be really great if you worked for about 90, 100, hours a week. And this coming from a person who's known to like camp out in Tesla factories for like 3 or 4 weeks at a time, just like pitch a tent. And like when they say camp out, it's not like he just hovers. It's like he literally like, pitches a tent and lives there.
Yeah.
So there's some Jamie Dimon saying the same thing. They're monitoring security card swipes to see how much time people are spending in the office. And while he, provides financial guidance saying that, remote work is going to be more of a thing in the future. He doesn't want it for any, company that he's involved with, and really forcing people to come back in the office. So you've got this whole like get back in the office and get back to work, which is an interesting nuance because it's like assuming that people who are not in the office are not working. And we could talk a lot about that. But at the same time, you've got this really interesting experiment going on around the largest experiment that's ever been done around a 4-day work week. I'd like to talk a little bit about that and just all these things that tend to point to, what the future of work could be, what it probably is going to be, what it probably isn't going to be. And then you have this fault line of people who are, on one side fighting it, and on the other side embracing it and trying to extend it. And then, of course, what are the implications for work tech as the world changes, not just the world of work, but as the world changes so significantly based on not only our experiences during the pandemic, but just all of the, changes that were already happening that got accelerated by the pandemic.
Yeah.
And so we got a lot to talk about. A lot to talk about. Let's talk about return to the office, because why the hell not?
Yeah. Why the hell not?
Why are we still talking about this? I don't know.
Well, I know there's a very good reason for it, and I think that to kind of throw some fuel onto the fire, there was also a recent survey that we cited in our industry briefing that went out to the team this morning about it's something like 76% of several hundred New York-based CEOs said that having workers in the office is vital to the bottom line. And so I think what's clear when you have someone like an Elon Musk or a Jamie Dimon coming out and basically saying the quiet part out loud, which is that CEOs everywhere are just quite frankly scared shitless of the possibility that employees won't be returning to the office. And a lot of these are established companies. They are established industry leaders in whatever industry they're in, and they have a vested interest in things not changing, in their built-in advantages of size and scale of these giant palatial offices in very expensive locations that people spend a lot of time in. They want to see basically the return to 2019. And I think that there's sort of a hope amongst those business leaders that when you're moving into what could be a recessionary period, there's a reset of the labor dynamic that typically favors management. Yeah. People become afraid that they're not going to have a job, and so they're less likely to ask for raises. They're less likely to seek out, new employment. And what we're seeing and play out is, going back to the jobs report from last week, another very solid jobs report. Things have, really been tilted in favor of in-demand skill sets in the market for decades now, but that's just even tilted more in favor of labor in the last 2.5 years. And that rebalancing is not happening organically. If anything, workers are more empowered than ever to dig in their heels and say, hey, I don't want to go back to the office.
Yeah, and I mean, let's go back in history. Isn't this where the 40-hour work week came from? Mm-hmm. Isn't this where unions came from? Yeah. Isn't this where organizations like OSHA came from? It seems that, a lot of these innovations, and, I'm aware that when I say innovations, I'm showing my bias, but it's clear that a lot of these innovations came at times when labor had the upper hand, when it was difficult for companies to find enough people to do the jobs that were necessary to run their core business. And that's when people were able to advocate using their power to, really change the world. I mean, life before the 40-hour work week, for a lot of people was pretty bleak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And, if you take our own experience, we've had, a 4-day work week for a long time now. I think a lot of us share the same sentiment that it's very difficult to imagine going back to a 5-day work week after having a 4-day work week. It's a complete change in the quality of life.
Yeah.
And I'm using quality in the sense of, I'm not necessarily implying, although this happens to be true for us, that the quality as a measure of like how good is it goes up. And I'm just talking about quality as like the nature of life. The nature of life changes significantly when you work 4 days a week instead of 5 days a week. It's hard for me to imagine, not only asking people to go back to a 5-day work week, or come into the office, but also myself engaging in those things, right?
Yeah.
And so perhaps we're anomalies because, we run a business and, I don't think we share the same sentiment that having people together in a physical space is, critical to, our business.
Well, and but that's, you're touching on something that's really interesting about the having people together in terms of creating good career experiences and sort of personal growth that employees benefit from. I think that we're seeing kind of unfold in real time a lot of research from different entities. Microsoft is doing a lot of research on this, and there does seem to be a missing element in hybrid work or permanent remote work, where you're not having necessarily the same experience that you would get from an in-person experience in terms of a lot of the intangibles. And there is a fear, and I think it's, rightly so, when you look at some employees are going to want to go back to the office and work from the office at least some of the time, if not all of the time, and other employees won't. And there's a concern: is this going to create sort of a class system where employees who go back to the office are disproportionately favored in terms of professional growth, promotions, raises, things like that, versus employees who want to work remotely? And then it's just, are employees who are working remotely getting just the same sort of professional growth, not through any sort of intentional oversight or malice, but just the experience is different. There's a lot of communication that humans benefit from that is sort of nonverbal, that you pick up on, that is just quite frankly lost when you're on the other side of a camera.
Yeah, it's so interesting to me because, I've often, referred to this as, kind of a failure of imagination. This particular aspect is the answer, because there clearly are some things missing in our own research of our own people and our research of, kind of work tech trends. Most people like the remote work setup. But there are some themes, and, one of the primary themes is that people feel disconnected from their fellow workers. They occasionally feel isolated. They occasionally feel lonely. So that's one big, kind of bucket of negative things associated with remote work, weighed against a big bucket of really positive things. And then the other is like the innovation collaboration gap, this notion of intangible. And, I do have an allergic reaction whenever someone uses the word intangible. Not you, but, it's like everyone always talks about the intangibles, and really they're just saying, I've reached the limits of my imagination and my ability to describe it, you know? And so they refer to these intangible, outcomes on collaboration, innovation, et cetera, that apparently can only be achieved, by working together in a physical office. The question that I have is, is the answer to bring everybody back into the office with all of the, negative parts associated with that, so that you can pursue, a solution to, the positive parts that you want back? Or is it to figure out a way to replace what's missing with something more tangible, something that can actually succeed in helping people feel connected, less isolated, less lonely, and can create, opportunities for spontaneous collaboration, for learning, for mentoring, et cetera.
Yeah, and I think it's probably the latter. It's going to be, we've got to figure out a way to do it, simply because, I think that, to go back to my point about, the defenders of the status quo are the ones with the most to lose. There are companies like ours that have embraced things like 4-day work week, that, hiring basically from anywhere, very distributed talent pools, that, we've benefited from being able to hire people that ordinarily we couldn't hire, that are incredibly talented, but there's no way we can put everybody in a physical office, because, literally they're on, 3 different continents, and, dozens and dozens of locations. And so it's just not going to happen. We've got some physical offices. Some people will work there sometimes. We've got to figure this out. I think we, as in distributed, hybrid workforces, because it's just the reality. And, and so it's just like, they're really, I don't see that there's any kind of going back to the way things were. I think that we're going to be in a period probably of 5 or 10 years where a lot of companies are going to try to push things back. They, the companies who benefited from the status quo want to go back to that. companies that are benefiting from the disruption of the status quo, companies like ours that are trying to embrace this wholeheartedly, we certainly have a vested interest in figuring this out and making it work.
Yeah, and what's really, interesting to me, there's a lot of interesting stuff here, but what's really interesting to me is that a lot of these issues aren't new.
No.
I mean, companies have employed people from, other countries. They've had distributed workforces for, decades. And the reality is, prior to the pandemic, those folks just didn't have the people who, didn't live near headquarters, who didn't come into the office. I could, just to be overly reductive, there's basically two kinds of remote workers prior to the pandemic. Mm-hmm. There were the ones who were highly skill oriented, and their skill was so valuable that being remote and being judged by the quality of their work, like coding and stuff like that, didn't really require that they had a physical face-to-face presence in the office in order to advance their careers, because their skills, helped them advance their careers in that context. And then you had other folks who were more like, let's say, business development representatives who were developing other territories in other countries or whatever. And they had a very, many of the successful people in that situation had a whole philosophy about how to, maximize their time in a face-to-face context, when they visited, for the sales conference or when they visited corporate headquarters. I even remember us, Rita Jackson, who is the only person who is in our Hall of Fame, and, we retired her shirt and hung it in our office. Rita was great because she was in Canada, and when she would come to the office, she would put her picture up on everybody's monitor,
Yeah.
And, people really just felt like we were, Rita was always around. And so there's always been but all that aside, generally speaking, people who didn't work in, kind of the gravitational pull of the headquarters or a major regional office did suffer in a lot of ways, and no one really seemed interested in, fixing it. And so what has really changed about that? With people like Elon Musk saying, come back to the office, all it's really going to do, in my opinion, is disenfranchise some of the most, productive, valuable folks, because they don't participate in the social aspect or the game part of the work experience.
Well, I think what's interesting specific to Elon Musk is, he probably is, globally speaking, the foremost business innovator alive today. I can't think of another name because you look at what he's done with Tesla and with SpaceX and, all of his various enterprises is, in some ways, he's incredibly brilliant, and he refuses to believe that something is not possible. And he's done a lot of amazing things. However, what's become very clear, especially with this, thing where he just fires off this seemingly idle tweet of, oh yeah, I'm going to cut 10% of the company. All he's doing is, this isn't a new thing. He's very much, in a lot of ways, a CEO from the Jack Welch playbook of cut the bottom 10% of your workforce every year, because he did it in 2019. He did it in 2018. And it's just he's just continuing to do what he's going to do. But when you think about how the talent dynamic has changed, I think that there are going to be talented people who are hard charging, striving people who do not mind working in a pressure cooker, high stakes environment, because they want to reap the rewards that they believe come along with that. But I think that the danger that you run into when you make those kind of pronouncements is, your best people know that they have options. And if they don't feel like they want to play the reindeer games anymore, it's easy for them to vote themselves off the island, which is you look at Atlassian is running a campaign specifically to hire Tesla employees. And so it's going to be very interesting to see how the Tesla employment brand navigates this, if there is any change to this and an impact on the company because of it.
Yeah, and here's I'm so glad you brought up Jack Welch, because you probably read the same article that I did about the book coming out from David Gell's, The Man Who Broke Capitalism. Yeah. How Jack Welch gutted the heartland and crushed the soul of corporate America, and how to undo his legacy. Mm-hmm. And the thesis of this book is that basically the pursuit of, short-term profits and, an over-rotation on meritocracy, or at least the way that meritocracy was approached in the Welch model, actually ended up destroying one of the greatest companies in history. Yeah. And, here we go again, right? And, I remember when Twitter said, hey, everyone can work from home forever. And I think if you're a public, like a business, or if you're a very large private business, or, whatever, you should be really careful when you use words like forever, because here comes Elon Musk, right? Maybe going to buy Twitter and run it. And then all those people who were promised they could work, from home forever. Well, here comes capitalism saying, well, now there's new ownership. We're under new management now. And 40 hours per week minimum, in the office. And what impact is that going to have, on, folks who had grown accustomed to imagining a future that, they may be the victim of a big rug pull.
Yeah. And I mean, now let's take that into the world of work tech. What's interesting when you talk about Jack Welch is a lot of the ideas that Jack Welch propagated are literally hard-coded into legacy talent management software. Yes. And now what we're seeing is a rejection of a lot of those things, like cascading goals and, force ranking, and a lot of those concepts are fine. Basically, I think that they've kind of hit the limits of their shelf life, simply because the labor market is rejecting them. Yeah. Employees are saying, this is horse shit. We don't want any part of this. And now you're seeing in real time a demand and a market need for new innovations. Colloquially, I guess it's employee experience software. Right. How it's manifested is in a lot of different ways, but that's a key driver of everything that we're seeing playing out in our industry daily.
Yeah. And it's just so, ironic to me, the things that there's a lot of selective adoption of concepts. And, I think what a lot of people are betting on, a lot of CEOs and large organizations are betting on, is that employees have the upper hand for now, but what goes up must come down. Right. The Fed is slowing down the economy. There's a conscious attempt to, cool off the labor market. And once the power dynamic has been, rebalanced, then companies will be able to do whatever the fuck they want. Yeah. Just like, they're always able to do whatever they want when unemployment is higher and, people are, struggling to find work, as opposed to struggling to decide which job, they want to take. I mean, even summer camps can't stay staffed. In Austin, Texas, they could only fill 30% of the lifeguard positions. Wow. So they can't open all the public pools. And why? Because the lifeguards can walk into a $70,000 a year internship or job or something like that, and so right now labor does have the upper hand, but, going back to this like selective adoption of concepts, this notion of the war for talent came out in, late 1997. Yeah. And, what people forget, so everyone bought into the war for talent, right? Everyone bought in. But what they forget about the thesis of the war for talent is that there was going to be a long-term labor shortage, right? A long-term structural labor shortage. And that the competitive axes upon which companies, rotated was no longer going to be product quality or, this, that, or the other, but it was going to be their ability to attract, retain, et cetera, develop, an evergreen workforce. And so the selective adoption there is like, yeah, war for talent. We need to be really good at hiring. We need to be really good at developing. But they forgot the part about the long-term labor shortage, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's possible that the long-term labor shortage is finally manifesting in a way that was predicted a long time ago, and that we're not going to go, but like what goes up might not come down in terms of never having enough people to fill the positions that need to be filled in order for these companies to exist at the level that they want to exist at. And you see this everywhere, right? You see this in basically like AI, for instance, and this is kind of the key irony for me. The entire industry of work tech for the last decade has been moving towards removing the imperfection of human decision making and focusing on results and focusing on merit, right? And so here we are in the pandemic, in the greatest test case in history for being able to evaluate people by their performance, and not based on the human bias of a manager's perception of someone based on the face-to-face time that they spend with them. So you look at all of these things that we wanted to accomplish for all this time: diversity, equity, and inclusion, meritocracy, et cetera, a greater employee experience. And all of these things, the possibilities for achieving them are unfolding in front of us, and yet people want to go back to inserting bias in the entire experience because they keep saying it's all about just getting people together. And what does that really mean?
Right. And I think that, furthermore, when you look at, kind of what is playing out in real time in the market, last 12, 18 months, I think we've all been experiencing, it's just like, why are there not enough servers at the restaurant that I want to go to? Why are there not enough workers in retail? Why are flights getting canceled? I think that what you're finding is that you look at a lot of these jobs. And so one thing I know that you and I share in common is we like to go sit at the bar when we go to a restaurant, because in part, we like to talk to the bartender. You can have a great conversation. Yeah. You brought this up before. I was having a conversation a couple months back with the bartender when I was having lunch one day. And I was asking, so what do you think is going on with the fact that restaurants can't hire people? And he said, what I think it is that this is a really shitty job for a lot of people. There are a lot of bad managers, a lot of bad owners, and the public is pretty terrible to service personnel. And so if you have an option to go do something else, you're probably going to go do that something else. And I think that we've seen over the last couple of years, people in a lot of these occupations were at first forced out of them and then realized that, hey, this is an opportunity to do something else. And now there's this void of workers across a lot of different industries. And I think that rushing into that void is going to be a lot of automation, whether you're talking about, automating the checkout in a retail situation, automating the experience even in quick serve dining restaurants, a lot of hospitality situations, over the road truckers, things like that. Over the next 10 or 15 years, we could see AI and automation really displacing a lot of these occupations. I think the question's going to be, as an employer, what's the right balance of people versus essentially products and automation in your labor portfolio?
Well, and think about everything. I mean, everything you just said. So first of all, just another interesting article I read. Tipping sucked prior to the pandemic. During the pandemic, tipping in restaurants went up to an unprecedented level. And now a lot of people feel that, the pandemic is ebbing and there's a lot more people going out to restaurants. Tipping is actually below pre-pandemic levels.
Wow.
So just, an interesting thing, social thing, human behavior. But, the other thing in what you said is like, my studio is right next to a grocery store. I go over to the grocery store, on my way home to buy stuff to cook dinner and, et cetera, et cetera. You can't go through, there's like 30, checkout lines, and one of them is usually staffed, and they're sending everybody else through the self checkout line. I mean, like 95, or more % of people are going through the self checkout line instead of going through, the line where someone can actually help you. And this is what everyone was scared of. You know, it's like, oh, all this automation is going to happen. You know, all this self-service is going to happen. You know, robots are going to build cars, et cetera, and they're going to take all our jobs, and the economy is going to stop growing, et cetera. All of that stuff is happening right now.
Yeah.
The economy is growing so much that we have to artificially cool it down, and it's the tightest labor market in history.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's just all this obvious evidence that, you know, the fear that people have about change associated with, you know, the workplace, you know, dynamics of the future is unfounded. Mm-hmm. And if people invested themselves in, you know, the change instead of trying to resist it, that there could be a lot of opportunities for organizations, and that there's going to be a lot of new types of work and new jobs and all that stuff created, you know, in a vibrant economy.
Yeah, and I think that, yeah, I mean, and I think that there's a precedent for this historically. If you go back almost a century, when you look at essentially the advent of the assembly line and bring that into heavy industry with, you know, Henry Ford at Ford Motor and Alfred P. Sloan at General Motors, it's just like, both those guys were first-class sons of bitches when it came to labor relations. And I mean, but there came a point where they realized, you know what, in order to get the skilled labor that I need to execute my business strategy, I need to raise wages. I need to do things like offer health insurance. And that they're coming out of that came essentially a new sort of approach to management labor relations that, whilst not always functional, was, you know, at least a little more symbiotic in terms of everybody kind of gets what they need, and really kind of changed, you know, the traditional labor dynamic from that industrial revolution, really Dickensian approach to labor. I think we're really in kind of a similar period right now where basically the relationship between management and labor is going to change, but now there's this additional dynamic of automation and technology that we're going to have to find. I think it's a different social compact between workers and employers, and we're just kind of feeling all of that out right now.
Well, so let's you know, establish layer one of the layer cake here. So, you know, do you believe that there's a true fault line between, you know, companies who want all of their employees to return to work like the good old days, or as the New York Times wrote this weekend, the first time I've seen it in as a capitalized phrase, the before times. Right. So, do you believe that there's a true fault line of people who want everyone back in the office like the before times, and people who believe that there is a way forward in a hybrid or remote environment? Do you believe that those are two equally opposed forces that are, you know, both have, you know, good and bad points?
I don't know that they're equally opposed. I think both sides do have good and bad points. I do believe that when you look at, again, talking about essentially New York-based, you know, large employers, and using those as a proxy for any large employer in any large, expensive urban population center, you look at the number of employees who are going into the office in Midtown Manhattan is down something like 75%. And you think about, you know, how much money goes into the per square foot real estate, just the overall capital investment that these companies have in just real estate, and then what the trickle down of it is. Okay, so employee isn't going into the office. What does that do for, you know, hotel space? What does that do for restaurants, and just sort of like the larger economic impact of the broader economy? I think that there's some of the before times very much is we want it to go back to the way that it is because we have a lot of business investment that's sort of riding on that. And so I think that that's part of it, but I think that you're seeing companies that don't have that same sort of vested interest in return to status quo, and are looking at, you know, disruption and change as potentially an opportunity to reset the field and take advantage of that. I think that's where the real fault line is.
Yeah. So take two companies in the same industry and flash forward 10 years from now. Which company do you think is going to win? The one that embraces remote hybrid work, or the one that fights against it and tries to reestablish the before times work dynamic?
The ones embracing change and, you know, knowing that it's going to be messy, Nobody has all the answers. We're going to try and fail at some things, but I just don't think that there is going back to the way it was before. And I think that it's the more that companies try to get it back to, the status quo, the more painful it's going to be for them.
And so how will work tech respond? What new categories are going to pop up? What categories are going to go away? How are established categories going to change?
I think, and then this is what's interesting, is I think that you're going to see work technology catering to both of those audiences. I mean, you look at the case of JP Morgan Chase, there's this uproar that they're having because of essentially widespread employee surveillance technology, both for in-office and outside of office workers. And employees are sort of rightfully antagonized and, anxious about it. And so I think that there's probably a lot of money to be made in selling stuff to those type of workers. I think it's kind of, reprehensible.
Like surveillance technology, for instance.
Yeah, I mean,
productivity measurement technology.
Yeah, we're already seeing that. But I also think that you're going to see a lot of we do it because we have been doing it, things like traditional performance reviews, goal alignments, those type of approaches being, even more rapidly abandoned than what we were seeing before, just because a lot of it is, I think that if you want to get to a 4-day work week, there's definitely 8 hours of bullshit a week in most businesses that you can get rid of.
Yeah.
And a lot of that bullshit is sort of hard-coded, old school approaches to operations and HR. It's getting rid of meetings. It's getting rid of ineffective, inefficient processes. And I think that there's going to be some weed out amongst established leaders. If I'm the SAP's, Oracle's, Workdays of the world, I'm more than a little bit nervous because I have, decades of investment in the hard code that makes all of those things happen. And I'm wondering if I'm going to be able to innovate fast enough to basically grow and sell products to both of these different constituencies within the workplace.
So you made a leap there from remote work to the 4-day work week, which I find really interesting because that's like that's a really long bridge, right?
Yeah.
The first bridge is like remote, hybrid, distributed, whatever people want to call it, depending on their unique context. Then there's this whole other thing that's popping up around, the 4-day work week and what that looks like and the different flavors of it. That's really aggressive. It's, really innovative. People have been theorizing about it and testing it for a long time, but no one's, if you talk to 100 people who run companies and say, would you ever consider a 4-day work week? Most would say absolutely not. It just doesn't make sense. And they'll cite all this research that, demonstrates it doesn't work and why it doesn't work. And, if you talk to the one person out of the 100 who says it's the greatest thing ever, they'll cite all this research about why it's great and why it works. But what is really interesting is that, there's the world's biggest 4-day work week experiment's about to kick off in the UK. It's 3,300 workers spanning 70 companies, ranging from providers of financial services to a fish and chip restaurant. Basically it's going to be, I think, a 6-month, experiment. And one of the specific parameters of this experiment is during the program, workers receive 100% of their pay for working only 80% of their usual week in exchange for promising to maintain 100% of their productivity. Right. And so the question is, on that 100% productivity part, does that mean like longer days, in the 4 days? Or does that mean that, there's all these other things that are happening which allow you to squeeze out a lot of the wasteful conventions of working that make it possible for people to achieve the same thing in 4 days that it used to take them 5 days to achieve, like commutes.
Yeah.
In New York, I'm sure the average commute is definitely over 30 minutes. It's probably more like an hour.
Yeah.
Right. And so if you're doing that twice a day, on a 5-day work week, that's 10 hours right there just in commutes.
Yeah.
Et cetera, et cetera. So how realistic do you think is it that the 4-day work week is even going to become 10% or 20% of the experience that people are having?
I think it's possible. I mean, I just think that from the data that I'm seeing, it's more employers are, at least in sort of knowledge work industries, are beginning to adopt that. And I think that there's going to be sort of a snowball effect. And then certainly as it becomes more pervasive with, essentially desk-bound knowledge workers, I think it's going to create more pressure on, service industries, deskless workforces to adapt as well. And so I think that it's just over time. I don't think it's going to become universal quickly, but I believe that what's going to end up happening is employees are going to vote with their feet. And it's just like, so great, I can, maybe make more money, but I have to go in an office. I have to work 5 days a week. I think that, there's enough, research out there that shows that employees are more than willing to trade some salary for more control over their lives. And I think that there's not going to be a shortage of employers out there who are willing to make that exchange. And as competition for talent increases, that's what's really going to drive lasting change over time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it just seems like there's so many opportunities to take advantage of here. I mean, even on a global social scale, it's like we talk about third world countries, right? We talk about the, lack of access to opportunity, for economic parity with people who, through the accident of birth, were not born in the middle of New York City, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, where they could go and, find the schools that they wanted, the jobs they wanted, et cetera. And here we are at a moment in history where anyone can work for any company in the world. The technology is not perfect, but it exists. And it does seem like there's a real opportunity here to engage, a third of the world that's not been engaged in, kind of the economic realities that we enjoy in the United States and that folks in Europe and, other places, enjoy. And we're balking at it, in most cases. And a lot of the technologies that overcome a lot of the challenges created by these new opportunities are rapidly evolving. I mean, I believe today is the Apple Developers Conference.
Yeah.
Isn't that today?
Yeah.
And one of the things that, they're likely to talk about a little bit is their mixed reality headset,
Yeah.
And by the way, we've been talking about the metaverse for a long time. I get it. But we've talked about it in terms of, Facebook becoming Meta and, the Meta Oculus, Quest to having like 70% market share or whatever. But there's Mark Zuckerberg, basically saying that the entire future of work technology is going to be based in the metaverse. And everybody's like, okay, Mark, go for it, dude. Yeah, crazy. And, stock price, plummets and all that stuff. But here comes Tim Cook at Apple saying that, okay, the iPhone changed the world. The watch was pretty good, but, it didn't change the world. It was pretty good, but it didn't change the world because most of the apps that, go onto that are accessible through the watch, they don't do much. They're not, very useful.
Right.
Kind of the health metrics and stuff like that are pretty interesting, but it's not a world changer the way the iPhone was.
Right.
And they're looking for a world changer. They're not going to be able to, continue to be the $1 trillion, company that Apple is without coming up with the next big thing. And they're saying that their next big thing is mixed reality. And so there's, and that's just one thread of technological innovation that could help overcome a lot of the challenges posed by remote work, that could make things like the 4-day work week possible, et cetera. But there seems to be, I guess we're in the chasm. I guess we're in, Geoffrey Moore's chasm, where it's like most people just can't visualize what the impact of a lot of these new technologies are going to be and what the impact is going to be on work tech. In my opinion, work tech is going to be intricately, woven into the metaverse. Work tech and metaverse are going to be, basically, the metaverse is going to be the biggest thing in work tech from a hardware perspective and from all the software that supports it. A lot of conventions around work tech that we've taken for granted for a long time, even though we fought against them, like performance management. When I say performance management, I don't think cascading goals are bad. I think performance appraisals are bad. And so, are these things finally dead? Are they going to go away? And are we going to start to look for, things to replace them rapidly so that we can start to embrace a lot of the opportunities that are created by the moment that we're in now? And I think that is the fault line. And I think 10 years from now, the companies who are actively, working to figure out how to make work happen in this new world are going to be the ones who are the new leaders. And then I think you'll see the big companies, and we've seen this a million times, but you'll see the big companies like the SAPs and the Oracles and, folks like that just buy their way in to innovation, 10 or 15 years after, mainstream adoption has just, the front edge has started once we're across the chasm.
Yeah. And I mean, what's interesting is there was some research that came out a few weeks ago from Burning Glass about what are the in-demand skills right now. And they were talking about, it was something like, since 2016 to now, something like 37% of the most in-demand, like 100 most in-demand skills have completely changed. So stuff that was, top 100 then, not so much, and been replaced with something all new. So when you think about, in a 6-year period, you could see essentially almost 40% of, critical skills changing. I feel like that's just going to continue to accelerate. And to me, it seems like the penalty for getting some of these answers wrong from a talent perspective is even greater. I mean, I think that not getting this current moment right for global brands really is an existential threat.
Yeah. Well, and here's my advice. So here's my advice to work tech startups right now. It's like very few companies, went from zero to tallest skyscraper in San Francisco by trying to recreate the dominant technology solutions that are being sold by the largest, companies in the world. I think that, there's a huge opportunity here to enable a different way of working that seems more on track and in line with the way that the world's evolving. And there's always going to be that, gravitational pull for, entrepreneurs and startups to satisfy the mainstream with features that they don't, believe actually promote their vision. Don't do it. Just don't do it, because, if you stay true to that vision and you're the pure play technology innovator that's on the other side of the fault line, the world is going to really open up for you. It takes a little bit longer, but you're not going to, end up, dragging all this baggage with you of all these people who are requesting all these features that you don't want to build, and they end up becoming detractors anyway. Just stay true to your vision. Get a critical mass of, forward-thinking, people who believe in your vision. Say no, and this goes way back to like the Siebel days. It's like Tom Siebel said, the most important deal that I ever did was the one I didn't do, which was for UPS. Because who do I sell to next? FedEx, and then what?
Yeah.
And the point is, the deals that you turn down often are as important or more important than the deals that you do, because of the trajectory that they put your technology solution on, or your innovation track.
Yeah, and it's just like that. This is something that has come up many, many times over the years in conversations with early stage growing companies. Is it's important to tell your customers no to some things, because if you're not careful about essentially how you're developing your product, you're really opening up a Pandora's box for what you can become, and you don't realize until you're 3 years down the product roadmap, and you turn around and you realize that you've made a horrible mistake.
Yeah. And it's not just tell your customers no. It's have a brand that says no to people who want to buy that old shit.
Yeah.
Have a marketing experience that says no. Have a sales experience that says no. And then when you get to the product experience and, customer success, keep saying no. While you say yes to, the people who share the attitudes, behaviors, and beliefs that you do about what the future of work looks like.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, we could talk about this forever.
We could.
But we must not.
This is a good point to put a bow on things. So, Bret, where do you want to leave things today?
I want to leave things with just fine, roll this tape, 10 years from now. There is a fault line. There are people who want to go back to the before times, and there are people who believe that things like the 4-day work week, remote first environments, etc., are not only cool, but also possible and productive. And I think those folks are going to win. And I believe that we're going to see a massive reshuffling over the next 5 to 10 years of leaders in the work tech industry, just like we did, at the turn of the century. And it's, as predictable as, like El Nino.
Yeah.
It's just a cycle that happens. And if you think that the field dynamic is going to stay the same forever and that you're always going to be a leader by doing the same things and hewing to the same principles, then you're ridiculously wrong. And this is a period of massive turnover, and you better recognize and do something about it, because you're going to be left behind.
Agreed.
And here's to the 4-day work week and remote first work environments.
Right there with you.
Right on, man. I'll talk to you next week.
All right. Take care, my friend.